Chapter 1. Key choices affecting style, quality, and price in fortified wines. Fortified wines are made in a very diverse range of styles: red, white, and rosé, dry to sweet, and youthful and aromatic to fully developed and oxidative. This chapter will highlight some of the key production stages and choices that influence the style, quality, and price of the principal fortified wines as a category before each of these wines is studied in more focus in the next chapters. Note, this is not a complete account of factors affecting style, quality, and price for each fortified wine. Grape variety. The grape variety may either provide its own aroma and flavor characters to the wine or be simply used as a relatively neutral base for the flavors of maturation. Vin du Natural from Muscat are the most obvious example of a fortified wine where the grape variety provides the main flavors of the wine, and this is enhanced by protective winemaking and early release from the winery. Even in Rutherglen Muscat, where the wines have been aged in warm and oxidative conditions, the aromatic notes of Muscat are still noticeable in the best wines. By comparison, Palomino is a relatively neutral variety, and the characteristic aromas of sherry all come from the maturation process. Structural components, such as acidity and, in black grapes, color and tannin, are also important factors. Madeira, notable for its high acidity, is made with a number of grape varieties, such as Cercial and Verdelho, that have naturally high levels of acidity. By comparison, although the combination of a bone-dry palate, low glycerol, and pungency from high levels of acetaldehyde can give a sensation similar to acidity in some particularly Fino and Manzanilla sherries, the actual level of acidity is low, a characteristic of the Palomino grape. Color is an important consideration in red wines. Port is usually made from a blend of grape varieties, and one of the factors considered in the blend will be attaining a suitable level of color in the base wine. The aims are very different in a basic tawny port, which needs to look aged in a short period of time and hence will be made from wines that are light in color when compared to a vintage port, which will be expected to retain a deep color over decades of bottle maturation. For the latter case, grape varieties that can enhance the intensity of color include Touriga Nacional and Saução. In a similar way to color, the level of tannins in black grape varieties will also be influential. High levels of tannins are not required nor desirable in early drinking styles of red fortified wines such as Ruby Port or Maure Grenet. By comparison, the role of tannins in color stability makes medium plus, or high levels of tannins beneficial in long-aged wines. Tannins soften with age, and therefore, in these wines, even high levels of tannins can become integrated into the wine and provide necessary structure and balance on the palate. Vineyard site. As well as the grape variety, vineyard location and climate are important influences on the base material used in the production of fortified wines. The vineyards of the Douro are scored according to factors such as location, aspect, and altitude, and this score determines how much port wine that plot of land can produce. Vintage ports will often be made from the grapes of certain vineyard plots known for their ability to produce outstanding quality wines that will age well. Vineyard site can also have influence on the style, Muscat-based VDNs. Muscat de Frontignan in the Languedoc produces slightly fuller wines with riper flavors from low-altitude vineyards in comparison with high-altitude sites of Muscats de Saint-Jean de Minervois. Timing of harvest. The timing of harvest is also an important consideration in many styles of fortified wines. In no case is botrytis, even as noble rot, desirable, and therefore growers will be looking to harvest before the increased risk of rain and hence increased humidity in the autumn. For some styles, fruit will be picked when it reaches or goes just beyond the minimum level of potential alcohol required by law. Unripe fruit flavors will be avoided. But in the case of sherry made from Palomino, the potential alcohol and health of the grapes are much more important for determining harvesting date than the range of flavors in the grapes. In other styles, such as Rutherglen Muscat, Pedro Jimenez, and Muscatel Sherry, the grapes are typically left on the vine for longer than would be required for normal full maturity to concentrate the sugars. necessary in these wines that have very high levels of residual sugar. Skin contact and extraction. The extraction of color, tannins, and flavor from the grape skins is a key process in the production of red fortified wines. These wines are often sweet and made by adding the fortifying alcohol midway through the fermentation process, limiting the period of maceration to as little as 2 to 3 days. Especially in wines that are to undergo long aging and hence need high concentrations of color, tannin, and flavors. This means that extraction techniques need to be as effective as possible. The port industry in particular has developed specialist equipment that permit maximum extraction while remaining gentle enough not to crush seeds and release bitter tannins. The contrast to this is the production of basic tawny and rosé ports, in which less extraction is desirable to create wines with a paler appearance. Some producers of white fortified wines, such as Madeira, muscat-based VDNs, and white port, may let their white grapes macerate for a limited time on skins, generally to increase body and texture and extract additional flavors. By contrast, skin contact is not desirable for biologically aged sherries such as Fino and Manzanilla, as the phenolic compounds extracted By contrast, skin contact is not desirable for biologically aged sherries such as Fino and Manzanilla, as the phenolic compounds extracted can restrict the growth of flor yeast. Timing of fortification. Dry fortified wines are fortified once fermentation is complete. The majority of sweet fortified wines are produced by fortifying midway through fermentation, stopping the fermentation by raising the overall alcohol level above that at which yeast can operate and leaving residual sugar that was present in the grapes. Producers will usually calculate the timing of fortification according to the level of residual sugar that is desired in the final wine. The greater the amount of sugar, the earlier the fortification. Some styles of sherries, such as pale cream, medium, and cream, are made by fermenting the wine to dryness and then adding a sweetening component. This can create wines in a different style than would be possible by fortifying during fermentation. In the example of cream sherry, a dry Oloroso is often blended with PX, combining the characteristics of aged dry Palomino with raisined PX. The fortifying spirit. The majority of fortified wines are fortified with 95 to 96% ABV grape spirit. Spirits with such high alcohol content are neutral in aroma and flavor, and hence these spirits do not mask the characteristics of the wine. Furthermore, the high level of alcohol minimizes the volume of spirit needed to bring the fortified wine to the required alcoholic strength, usually between 15 to 22% ABV depending on style, leading to less dilution of the base wine. The exception of port, which must be fortified with a grape spirit of 77% ABV plus or minus 0.5%. As the spirit is distilled to a lower level of alcohol, it is more characterful and contributes more of its own aroma and flavor characteristics to the blend. Also, due to its lower strength, a significant volume of spirit is required to bring the partially fermented must up to its required alcoholic strength of 19 to 22% ABV, again, meaning that the style and quality of the spirit has an important influence of the style and quality of the final wine. Although some producers choose to use more aromatic styles of spirit, especially in red ports, in rosé ports, a relatively subtle spirit will be chosen so as not to overpower this more delicate style of wine. The strength and volume of the fortifying spirit added influences the final alcohol level of the wine. Note, see on Systematic Approach to Tasting for Fortified Wines. Maturation. The maturation process is a defining stage in the production of many fortified wines. Some fortified wines, including a number of VDNs, ruby and rosé ports, and some white ports, are released relatively early from the winery with the intention that they should be drunk soon after release. Often, these wines are stored in stainless steel or concrete and are protected from oxygen. They therefore show youthful primary flavors. Other wines are released after a short period of aging with the intention that they will be improved in bottle. These wines, which include vintage and some late bottled vintage ports will be stored for a few years in large oak vessels before bottling. As these wines are designed to age in bottle, they will generally be very concentrated with high levels of tannins on release. After a number of years in bottle, the fresh fruit develops to dried fruit and the tannins soften and integrate. Other fortified wines, such as premium tawny ports, Madeiras, Rutherglen muskets, and some styles of VDNs and sherries, are aged oxidatively, often for extended periods of time. Their maturation is usually carried out in relatively small wooden vessels to encourage oxygen exposure. The small size also increases the rate of evaporation from the vessel and leads to ullage. It is a choice of the winemaker how often to top up the vessels and whether to fill them completely to the top as part of managing exposure to oxygen. A number of these wines are also matured in warm or heated conditions, which further speeds up oxidation, evaporation, and general maturation. The oxidative aging tends to develop aromas of nuts, caramel, and dried fruits. Another technique is biological aging, used for Fino and Manzanilla sherries. These wines are aged under a veil of floor yeast that protects the wine from oxidation while lowering levels of glycerol, and hence body, and contributing aromas of hay, apple skin, bread dough, and nuts. Maderization. The process whereby a wine is heated and oxidized is sometimes known as maderization, the term taking its name from the process of maturation that is used and has been for a number of centuries for the wines of Madeira. Rancio. Rancio is a tasting term used to describe a collection of aromas and flavors that are found in some styles of wines. Aromas are varied, but typical descriptors include leather, wood varnish, and strong coffee. The chemistry concerning their origin is not well understood, but it appears that the compounds extracted from wooden vessels, oxygen, and time all play a role. Blending. Blending is one of the most important processes in fortified wine production. Grapes or wines from different grape varieties, vintages, and vineyard sites may all be blended, depending on the regulations for the wine style being made, as well as wines that have been handled differently in the winery. The key aims of blending include balance. The components that need balancing will differ depending on the style of wine. For all fortified wines, alcohol is relatively high compared to unfortified wines, and therefore in wines of good quality and above, this should be integrated within the other components of the wine. As stated in maturation, many styles of fortified wines undergo long periods of aging. These wines become increasingly concentrated and lose their primary fruit characters. Although these wines are complex, a better balance in the final wine is usually achieved by blending some younger wines with the older wines to provide a degree of freshness against the developed flavors. This is a practice that is particularly notable in sherry and Rutherglen muscat. Consistency. Many fortified wines are non-vintage products, and therefore it is expected that they will show consistency year on year. In some regions, the wines of different vintages mature separately, called static maturation. At a certain point, skilled blenders will taste a variety of wines from different vintages and use their experience to create the blend. In sherry production, a Solera system is used. This is a method of fractional blending that ensures consistency among the vessels of a particular age. A modified version of a Solera system is used for Rutherglen muscat. Style. Blending is an essential method of influencing style. In port, the blend of grape varieties will be an important factor in the level of color, tannin, and flavor concentration in the young wine, and therefore its ability to age. In sweetened sherries, the blending in one of the sweetening component. In sweetened sherries, the blending in of the sweetening component, such as PX wine, completely transforms the style of the final wine. Brands are important in most fortified wine categories, and therefore blending is often used to create a certain house style across the product range. Complexity. Similar to the above points, wines of different ages or that have been treated differently in the winery may be blended to gain a greater range of flavors. Volume. In most regions producing fortified wines, vineyard holdings are small and therefore it is necessary to blend grapes from a number of different producers. Similarly, a number of fortified wines are matured in small vessels, and therefore blending of these vessels is usually needed before bottling to make up a sufficient volume of consistent wine. Price. Fortified wines can reach premium and super premium prices, but a significant proportion of sales volumes are made up of wines that are mid-priced or even inexpensive. Meeting a competitive price point is essential, and in order to obtain the best value product, the producer may decide to add a small amount of older wine to give some complexity to a blend of younger, more simple wines. Finishing. The majority of fortified wines will be stabilized, fined, and filtered before bottling to ensure they are clean and clear for the customer. Some styles of port, such as vintage, single quinta, crusted, and some LBVs, are purposefully not filtered. Sediment may be noticed when these wines are opened and poured, and decanting or passing the wine through a wine funnel and strainer may be necessary. Equally, some styles of sherry termed en rama either undergo a light fining and filtration or not be fined or filtered at all. In style, they are generally more pronounced and complex than their fined and filtered counterparts. The systematic approach to tasting for fortified wines. When tasting fortified wines, the systematic approach to tasting, SAT, should be used in much the same way as it is used for unfortified wines. The one area of difference is the assessment of level of alcohol. The fortified wines in the specification all have alcohol levels of 15% ABV or higher, and hence all would be high if calibrated on the same scale as unfortified wines. Therefore, the scale for alcohol for fortified wines is low, 15 to 16.4% ABV, medium, 16.5 to 18.4% ABV, high, 18.5% ABV and above. For all of the other scales of the SAT, fortified wines should be treated on the same scale as unfortified wines. For example, a fortified wine that is assessed as medium intensity should have an intensity comparable to that of a medium intensity unfortified wine. End of Chapter 1.